So Cliff, Ham on Rye, what did you make of it?
I thought this was a really interesting experience. You know, it's hard to say, and I think this is the point, what genre this film is. It kind of straddles genres, and so basically it looks pretty much throughout the whole thing, it looks like a kind of US teenage prom movie. Not really a genre which I'm very familiar with, but the kind of images of that and the kind of idealism and the fantasy of that, it really consistently stays with that visual theme throughout the whole film. It never lets up on that, really, or very rarely. It's very small moments. But it's not a teenage prom movie. It's also a horror movie. It's potentially a horror movie, and it's kind of in between being this teenage prom movie and a horror film. And I think, it made me think of, there's lots of films which kind of show, what's under the surface of this kind of idyllic fantasy Western lifestyle or American lifestyle, and I thought of American Beauty a little bit, and but I thought more about David Lynch and kind of Twin Peaks. It had a bit of a kind of Twin Peaks feel to it, the kind of idealism, but something going on underneath. But I think that it's much more subtle than Lynch, in the sense that it really stays true to its teenage prom kind of aesthetic and feel. It never lets that go, whereas ultimately, Twin Peaks is an example where it might start off with a kind of teenage prom type characters and events, but it turns into something much more horrific. It kind of, you don't just see subtly that there's something more horrific underneath. It actually turns into a different genre, whereas this never does. It kind of keeps us hanging in between, what is always a teenage prom film with this potential for horror underneath. And I think that's really skillfully done. I think that's quite unique. I'm not sure I've ever quite seen a film like it. So I did find it was a really interesting experience. And, I think the opening scene is very interesting because you get a few minutes before that teenage prom aesthetic is introduced, and it really establishes menace. The way that you just see these hands trying to frantically light a lighter, and someone seems to be tuning a guitar, but in fact they're not tuning it, because the note is just going ever upwards. So at first it sounds like someone's trying to tune it, but it seems that it's nothing more than a device to just kind of slightly unsettle you at the beginning. So I kind of think that you have those few minutes that just give you an indication of something not right. It's certainly not at the point of horror, but it's just slightly unsettling you for a few minutes. Then it launches straight into the opening titles, and the font and the music, it's so, taking you into the teenage prom movie. And, as I say, it just stays completely consistent with that. But, it's always got the potential of turning into a horror film. There were quite a few points where I thought something bad was going to happen, and it just didn't. And, that scene where where there's some balloons, she's lying in bed and there's some balloons tied up, and then one of the balloons just comes loose and goes to the ceiling. It's a very small incidental matter. And I thought that was incredible, that scene, because it was like a jump scare without the jump. You know, it was like a horror moment. That was as about horrific as the film got in terms of trying to scare you. It's like she jumped, but we didn't jump. It was just this balloon floating gently up to the ceiling. And I thought the film, as I say, I thought it was really, really skillful in that. The horror moments were, you know, like you've got those guys driving around in the car and they're kind of stalking people almost. They're spying on people, and you always feel that they're, you know, they might be about to attack someone, and they just drive off, you know. So there's kind of an air of menace underneath, but nothing really bad seems to happen. I guess the most visually horrific moment is where we see the meat in the grinder. And, you know, it's like I was sufficiently unsettled by that point that you do start, you know, I was finding myself thinking, oh, is this a film about cannibalism? Is this human meat? There was something about the meat coming out of this grinder that just was quite unsettling. And in a way, that was the most visually horrific point of the film. But in the end, it was just the guy pushing the meat through, you know, because it was a deli, you know, and that's where that would happen. I thought the acting was great. I did find it very kind of authentic and, you know, quite compelling. Some of the just incidental conversations and some of the things that people were telling each other, and, you know, I just felt it was, yeah, I really liked the acting. And, you know, I kind of like the metaphor, the overall metaphor, which I guess is what the film is about, that, you know, we're living a life as kind of zombies, that we're asleep, that and that there is a chance to go somewhere else, but, you know, you have to conform with these bizarre rituals which you don't necessarily even understand. You know, I thought that scene with the kind of the ritual, the mating ritual, whatever you call it, dating ritual, I thought that was really extraordinary, because you really felt the film was it was just unique, really. At that point, you really didn't know what you were watching, but you knew that something really unsettling was happening. But, you know, that they were happy, that the people, as they walked off into the sunset, and, you know, it's like the people who got out apparently were happy. But, you know, even that was questioned. But, you know, it's like the girl who questions what they're doing and kind of, you know, says, "Is that, do you really think this is all right?" You know, and the other girls say, "Well, at least there's good food." You know, it's like the questioning wasn't encouraged, because she was the one who didn't get chosen to go to this other place, and she gets condemned to live in this kind of zombie hell where nothing really bad is happening, but it's just like people are just staring blankly into space. And, you know, it's so I quite, you know, I kind of appreciated that metaphor. I thought that was, you know, very obvious, but so, you know, I think in some ways I did find the film dissatisfying, because it feels like it's completely a tease. I mean, I can't really decide whether this film is just genius and really works or not, because I think it's very skillfully done. It works at what it tries to do, but it's it is very clever. But, you know, why would you do that? Why would you kind of just keep the audience hanging between two genres? I do wonder if it's almost just like an interesting experiment. You know, it's like, can I keep the audience hanging between two genres? It's a little bit like, if you're not going to give your audience some resolution at the end of the film, you know, that's been done, kind of just not resolving a film at the end, or, you know, having an unhappy ending instead of a happy ending. You know, generally we have an expectation when we go to the cinema that we want some resolution, and really a lot of the time we want a happy resolution. You know, I don't need a happy resolution, but I do need some kind of resolution, and I feel that this denied me that. This just wanted to keep me hanging between the two. It was like sex without a climax. You know, it was like a real achievement, but yeah, I'm still not sure, but I'm really impressed by how skillfully it kept me hanging between the two, and maybe maybe it is genius, this film.
Yeah, I felt similarly. I really enjoyed it. There was a kind of heyday of American high school movies in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that coincided exactly with my teenage years. So my adolescent memories are steeped in this genre. And so I have a really rich and redolent kind of tactile experience of this kind of movie. And I get the feeling, oh, I haven't looked the filmmaker up, but I imagine he's probably around my sort of age. And I would imagine this sort of homage to the high school movie is probably comes from that kind of rich engagement with those films in the first place. So I really liked the kind of nostalgic, strange texture of the film. There's something very strange and interesting going on with time in this film as well, because as you mentioned, that opening sequence where they're trying to light the firework, they do light the firework finally, but before the firework can burst, we cut, and then we come back to the scene at the very end. And it's almost like whatever happens in between is kind of happens between the moment where the firework goes off. And there are strange sort of moments where it really makes a point of pinpointing the time. There's a point where one of the guys is in bed and we focus in on the digital alarm clock and it's 9:13 p.m. and the camera actually pans to make sure we've noted that.
Yeah.
As you said, I'm not sure if that's because there is a really sophisticated sort of strategy in the background here, or if the film is determined to just keep gesturing towards a sense of overarching meaning that isn't really there. In other words, whether there is a really clever kind of structure to the film, or if the whole thing, as you put it, is a tease. And a bit like you, I'm not entirely sure whether I care either way, but I'm certainly undecided about it. It has a charmingly offbeat style. I really like the way occasionally it would frame a character who's completely external to the conversations we can hear, and then someone would just kind of be there in profile for a few seconds and then wander off. And occasionally the camera will focus on things like a guy spits out of a car window and the camera tilts down to look at the spit on the ground for like 4 seconds. Later on, Monty, the guy who owns the deli, tosses that little plastic pig out the door, and we focus on this little plastic pig in the gutter for a few seconds. And that kept the film really interesting, I thought, really nicely paced and interspersed with these strange off-kilter moments. So I love the atmosphere of it. I also thought another touchstone for it seemed to me to be that movie Picnic at Hanging Rock, that Peter Weir film from I think it's from the early 70s. I haven't seen that movie since I was about 17, but I still remember the way that movie felt, because I remember those young girls in school in white dresses sitting under the tree before they just disappear, and the feel and sensation and texture of that film I think sweeps through this one as well. So that felt like a really clear and potent allusion to me. I found the second half a bit more, so it's almost a film of two halves. There's the sort of daylight scenes where it's late evening and you've got that like elongated light of summer where they're gearing up for what you think is going to be a prom, but as you say, is actually that strange ritual in a deli. I thought it was really funny as well that Monty in his office has got pictures of sandwiches in his office. and then there's like a second half where it's night. And I found that sequence more self-consciously weird. Like it was almost borderline parodic. There's the suggestion that something bad has happened to the guy with the ponytail. You know, what is it? What happened at Monty's? Try and put it out your mind. And I just couldn't help thinking of the running joke in that TV show Spaced, where something terrible has happened to Mike. And I think we keep getting flashbacks to Mike when he's a boy. And it's kind of the TV show plays up that silly sort of running, some trauma that we can't go near in the background. And so I felt that half of the movie felt a bit too, as I say, self-conscious in its strangeness. Touches that were striking and quite funny, like they park the car and get something out of the boot. What is it? And then they go zipping off on those scooters. You know, almost a bit silly, which I thought undermined how evocative and strange and vibrant the first half was. Because when this film gets that strangeness right, it's really intoxicating. There's a beautiful montage of like flowers and trees overlapping each other as the kids are walking down the street and stuff. And then, as you say, it builds to that wonderful scene in the deli where they're dancing. And it reminded me of that scene at the end of Inland Empire where the whole cast starts singing to the Cinnamon for like 6 minutes, you know, really mad scene and really intoxicating. And then it cuts that light that gets brighter and brighter as the kids kiss, and then they walk over the hill and disappear. And part of me feels like that was enough. You know, the film could have been 40 minutes long and I'd have been perfectly satisfied with it. The second half was interesting, but not quite as engaging as far as I was concerned. Yeah, I liked it, but I found the second half had, tonally, it reminded me, funnily enough, of more of like computer chess, the second half, than Virgin Suicides or something, you know. And I much prefer the Virgin Suicides kind of aesthetic and feel and texture of it. But an interesting film, certainly.
Yeah, I do think this film is beautifully shot. I forgot to mention that. As you say, the texture of it is amazing. And the way it never, you know, it never, it keeps surprising us, you know, as you say, by, you know, focusing on tiny things, but then creating these beautiful shots, you know, really stunning, and some close camera work in the initiation ritual thing, you know, which was really great. I thought the photography in this film was amazing. It did look great, this film, you know, so that definitely aesthetically, I think this, you know, that's what was so consistent, really, that you know, I just really enjoyed that. I think the point you make about time is that I felt confused about what time it was, because sometimes it seemed to be light and sometimes it seemed to be dark. And then, you know, you saw that guy in bed as if he was waking up and you thought it was morning, but it was actually 9:13 p.m. And we'd already seen it was 9:13 p.m. You could see that without the close up. But then, you know, it's like the director really wants to emphasize that it's 9:13 p.m., knowing that we already know it. I think that, you know, there's something very knowing about that action. And it's, yeah, maybe it's right that I hadn't really thought about that, the beginning and end are the same scene, and so it's just jumping around in time. But I just think that was all part of unsettling me, that you never quite knew what time it was. You know, were they there all night at the deli and coming out in the morning because it was light when they came out, or, you know, was that still at night? And I quite like that about it. It was uncertain. And you mentioned the firework. I thought the firework was, it wasn't obvious that it was a firework. It's like they light something and you think something's going to happen, and there's a little knobble in the fuse, so you think something might happen when it hits that knobble, for want of a better word, and nothing happens, and it just goes down to the next bump in the fuse. You know, so you don't even really know what that, I guess we do we hear some fireworks later? Maybe there are some fireworks, so maybe we do know it's a firework. The other thing I agree with you on is the kind of silliness. There were several moments when it was just silly, which was just really, I guess it's just unsettling as well, because it's like that didn't really fit with the film. It was really, you know, if you were making a kind of American prom movie, teen prom movie, you wouldn't put such silly things in it, you know, like the thing with the scooters. There was just something so weird about that, wasn't there? But also the scene when the guys are walking down the street and they kind of see some boys on the other side of the street, and they start walking in a really kind of, they start strutting all in unison, and then the other guys look at this and then they kind of climb a fence, you know, in a kind of in unison as well. And that, you know, that, I guess it just kind of adds to the unsettling nature of it. It was like so true to the genre of the, you know, the prom movie. It was so true to it, but constantly kind of undermining it in subtle ways that didn't completely, that never degraded the genre, but just left you really unsettled. The more I talk about it and hear you talk about it, I'm actually, you know, I think I'm concluding that it's a really interesting, great film that I wouldn't want this to become a new genre. It's like you want to see it once, but I'm finding that, you know, thinking about it the day after seeing it and articulating my thoughts, I actually think it's really impressive.
Yeah, me too. I really liked it. Really liked it.
Yeah, so recommended.
But yeah, definitely, definitely.
What's next then?
Next up is Songs My Brothers Taught Me by Chloe Zhao.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it.